to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show, and welcome back to football, everybody. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
Episode 16, here we come, and it's our first episode of the season, the regular season of NFL football. Justin, how are you, and are you ready for some football?
Man, we are a mere hours away from the kickoff of Thursday Night Football, the Chiefs and Texans. We're going to have a preview of that coming up here later on this episode. Can't believe we finally made it, Corey, man. I can't believe it.
Yeah, Justin, it's really, really exciting. And I want to ask you, Justin, now that we're about to go into week one, any recommendations, any advice for those folks as they're about to see their fantasy football teams perform for the first time?
Yeah, we've been doing all this work leading up to week one, right? I mean, you've been doing all this prep. You've had your drafts now at this point. You're looking at your squad, setting your lineups for week one. One of the quick things I wanted to bring up here as we get the show started is just for folks, our audience here, just to not overreact over 1 week of performances, right? You know, you've been doing all this prep work leading up to the season. You've got your guys that you've honed in on that hopefully are on your squad now. Don't overreact. Stay true to your pre-draft assessments and stick with your guys, right? I mean, look at last year, right? Prime example of this would be a guy like A.J. Brown, right? The wide receiver from the Tennessee Titans. The guy was a late round flyer in most redraft settings, and most people were probably dropping him after the first 6, 7, 8 weeks. And look what happened. He was a league winner at the end of the year. Stay true to your process, trust your gut, trust the talent, and don't overreact to 1 week. Corey, what do you think?
Yeah, well, Justin, I have to ask, do you happen to speak from experience with that A.J. Brown example?
Man, you're pulling at my heartstrings right here. Yeah, I was all about A.J. Brown last year. I held him in a keeper league up until I think week 8 or 9, and then Mariota went down, Tannehill came in, and he lit the league on fire. So I'm speaking from personal experience.
Yeah, and I got to agree, right? This is where we learn our best lessons for fantasy football is from experience. And yeah, I 100% agree. Stay true to what you drafted. At least let it play out for a few weeks. And, you know, I poked fun at Justin there, but I got to say I was also the fool who dropped Nick Chubb about a week before Carlos Hyde got traded. So I speak from experience too. Don't allow yourself to get fooled by some week one freak performances. We all remember the year where Ryan Fitzpatrick was the set the league on fire quarterback for the first 3 weeks a couple of years ago in Tampa. So certainly, sort of keep to your game and understand it is a season-long game. So have patience, right, Justin?
Yeah, exactly. Like look at Sammy Watkins last year, right? Week 1, another prime example. The guy blew up. Everyone had him as a top 10 wide receiver with Patrick Mahomes, and look what happened, man. Don't overreact to the good or the bad.
So we've got our first episode in our season-long format. Just a reminder, we are going to go past, we're going to go present, we're going to go future. In this week's episode, our past is going to be diving into this past week and a half or so, right before the season started up, to talk about sort of some situations that have changed that Justin and I want to talk about. In our present, we'll talk a little Kansas City, Houston preview. And then in our future, we're going to talk about what we're looking forward to in week one across the NFL, what fantasy storylines need to get played out.
Yeah, Corey, can't wait. We're actually talking about real football now, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, and without further ado, let's get to it.
On today's show,
all right, here we go. Like I said, we start our weekly format for you this week. Today, Justin and I will discuss a past, present, and future topic as you get prepared for your week one matchups. Justin, let's get started with the past. And why don't you talk to me about a fantasy situation that has changed a bit in the past maybe week or a week and a half? And what is your assessment on what's been going on?
Yeah, Corey. So the topic I wanted to bring up here during our past section of the show here today is the Washington football team's running back situation. Right, we had Adrian Peterson cut from the team just recently, and man, the Antonio Gibson hype train is out of control. This last week or two, we've seen this guy go from being a late round flyer to a legitimate top 75, even in some circles, a top 50 pick. Man, the hype has gotten completely out of control. Now, one of the things that I really liked about Gibson coming out of Memphis last year was his ability to catch the ball, right? When you're looking for a fantasy X factor at the running back position, you want to look for a couple things, right? You want to look for a guy that can pass protect, so he's able to play on all three downs, and then also a guy that can catch the ball, because we know how valuable catches and receptions are in fantasy football, especially if you're playing in a half PPR or a PPR format. Man, it's crazy. This guy's profile athletically is off the charts. The guy's a 99th percentile speed scorer, which is just crazy. Now, he's a running back, wide receiver hybrid player who played in a pretty crowded Memphis backfield in his collegiate level. And he took the majority of his snaps at wide receiver across his first 2 seasons at Memphis. Only had 60, 65-ish or so touches as a collegiate player in his last year at Memphis, but the guy was electric, breaking tackles left and right. I mean, if you're talking upside, this guy's upside is sky high. Now, Corey, we had the pleasure of talking to John Keim on Twitter the other day, who's a Washington football team beat reporter for ESPN. And, we kind of posed a couple questions to him. Now the AP is out of the picture here. Who's the first guy up? Who's the guy getting that first carry week 1? And he was pretty certain that it was going to be Antonio Gibson getting that first cut at the role here. The other thing I like about Gibson here is you look back at AP's comments that he made on his way out the door, and it was really flattering for Antonio Gibson. I mean, he talked a lot about how the football team is building its offense around the idea of featuring one guy that can do multiple things in their offense. And the team's been really impressed with him. I mean, you look at the camp reports from a lot of the beat reporters, it's nothing but glowing reviews from everyone on the Washington football team side. Personally, I don't know that I'd necessarily take a flyer on him in redraft just because of the unknown and where he's going now. It's kind of gotten a little out of control, but man, in Dynasty and Keeper, he's a great upside player to take. Corey, what's your take?
Yeah, here's the situation, Justin, where without a doubt, things have gotten a little too out of control with Gibson. I mean, it is still, even with AP cut, a crowded backfield. See, this is one of those situations where if you did draft early and you believed in Gibson kind of the way that you and I did, we really thought he had some kind of late round sleeper appeal talent. Yep. That's where sort of having an early draft paid off, because now a situation is paid off where, wow, he has a real opportunity for some usage in year 1. But as the way these things go, it's gotten way too out of control. He is now going in the 5th, 6th, 7th round of drafts, and he was super appealing in that round 14, round 15, but not so good. And when we're talking about taking a guy who's never even taken an NFL snap and honestly didn't even have the job prior to a week ago. So it's very risky. It's definitely something to sort of be cautious on, but at the same time, right? I mean, fantasy football is all about taking risks and going for the gold and sort of that old line of no risk it, no biscuit. So At this point, if you truly believe in Gibson and you really, really want to have this on your roster and you think he's about to be a league winner because he now potentially has the opportunity, sure, take him and see how it plays out. But I would preach caution here.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'll be watching very closely week 1, right? One of the things we're going to be looking at. How did the Washington football team's backfield touches get divvied out? I'll be curious to see it.
Justin, in the past week and a half, there's been another situation that certainly has affected me and affected a lot of our previous episodes, because if there's one guy I have been hyping up over these past few episodes, I mean, I've probably had 2 guys in total that I've really been sort of on the bandwagon for. One is Adam Thielen, just the guy I think is going to be a comeback fantasy machine this year, and he's going to lead your team to success. But the other guy I've been hyping since like episode 1 is Ronald Jones. And boy, this week hurt for sure, because we see Leonard Fournette being added to that backfield. Now, I don't care what Bruce Arians says, saying it's Rojo's job and Fournette is just a really, really nice insurance policy. Listen, I don't think Fournette is the most talented guy in the world. He's more of kind of like a big bruiser than anything else. People say he's a 3-down back, and I don't necessarily see that, even though he was given the role last year. He's still more of a first and second down guy. What I will say, though, is he's talented enough, though, that if he's on a roster, he's not just sitting on the bench. So that 3-down appeal that I saw, that glimmer of hope that I saw in Ronald Jones, is fading pretty fast, Justin, and it's got me a little upset. What do you think about Tampa Bay in this running back situation now?
Yeah, I know Rojo has been one of those guys that we had as a breakout player for this year. We've been touting him over the last number of months here leading up to the season. It's unfortunate for a young guy who we thought was going to get the shot at being a potential workhorse back in this offense with Tom Brady under the helm. And it's unfortunate. I guess the only thing I'd say for those folks that have already drafted Rojo and have him, it's very possible that Rojo may be very usable over the first few weeks of the season, especially as Fournette gets up to speed in the offense. I think I fully expect a somewhat frustrating committee situation unfolding here as the weeks progress, but it's very possible, Corey, that Rojo will have a usable floor over the first couple weeks of the season.
Yeah, Justin, I don't think it's necessarily Rojo's fantasy season is dead to rights, but at the same time, it certainly does look like his ceiling has narrowed a little bit more. Now, maybe I'm wrong, right? And maybe Bruce Arians saying that Rojo is still our guy and it's still his job to lose is something that we should take and take seriously. But I don't know. I mean, this is definitely a situation where it used to be something that I wanted to buy into all over. Now it's maybe best to avoid. If you believed in Rojo and you believed in the talent that we've seen develop over the past couple of years, sure, you can still take him. And if there is a glimmer of hope, you don't need to reach for him anymore in that 6th or 7th round. You can still probably get him in 9th, 10th, maybe double-digit round situations here.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I think he's going to be usable at least for the first couple weeks. Maybe he does emerge, right? I mean, we just don't know. It's one of those things that we could put a bunch of speculation around the situation, but I mean, who knows, right? I mean, Leonard Fournette was one of the lower graded pass blocking running backs in the NFL last season. And what if he blows up a couple pass protection schemes with Brady under the helm? I mean, he may not see the field after that.
Right, and not only that, Justin, but you have to imagine that while Fournette is getting acclimated to the offense, there will be a chance for Jones to really run away with this job. So if there was ever a time he's got to show up in these first couple weeks, and maybe he just keeps Fournette at bay, and Fournette is just sort of this change of pace guy whenever Rojo needs a breather. I don't think that's the real possibility here. I don't think that's the most likely outcome. I think what's going to happen here is it's going to become a frustrating committee. It's going to look the way it did last year when Rojo was splitting carries with Peyton Barber, and that's just not a great situation to buy into. But at the same time, we never know in fantasy football, so I guess we'll see what happens in week 1.
Yeah, I think this just further reinforces the fact, right, that you should be drafting your fantasy football team in as late of the year as you possibly can, right? I mean, things are going to work out in your favor. A situation like Antonio Gibson, if you took him as a late round flyer, now he's a 5th, 6th round guy. But if you took Rojo in the 5th or 6th round, now he's more of a 9th, 10th, or 11th round player. So just further reinforces the fact you should be drafting as late in the year as possible.
Yep, good point, because now we know the situation a lot better, and now we sort of have a feeling of how it's going to play out. But I guess we'll see. The one thing we can say, Justin, is that football is on the horizon, and now let's do our Week 1 Thursday night preview, the first game of the season. And Justin, it's a good one. We have the Houston Texans going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, the returning champions. This is a pretty exciting game to watch, Justin. You can't really start off much better than this. We have some new faces in some familiar places. We have some situations that are definitely going to play themselves out. Any thoughts on what we're going to be looking for in the fantasy aspect of the Week 1 Thursday night matchup?
Man, I can't wait for this game, right? You remember the divisional round last season, the Kansas City Chiefs came back and pulled off that epic comeback. They scored 28 points in the final 9 minutes and change of the second quarter. I mean, that was just a crazy game. 82 total points scored in that game. I think the over-under right now for this one at this time is right around 55 points. It's going to be a high-scoring game, man. I'm looking forward to it. I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to seeing is the integration of David Johnson into this Houston Texans offense, right? Is this guy going to be on the field every single down, similar to a Christian McCaffrey-esque player? What sort of looks is he going to get in the passing game? Are they going to kind of modify the offensive scheme to tailor Watson to check down a little bit more to DJ in the flat? It'll be interesting to see his usage, man. I know DJ's been being drafted this offseason and around that RB20 range. I think he's got a lot of upward mobility to be more of a high-end RB2, back-end RB1. I'll be very curious to see David Johnson's integration into this offense to see if he can have a renaissance of sorts here in his NFL career. Corey, how about yourself?
Yeah, speaking of running backs, we're also going to potentially get our first look at the rookie running back, the man who we think and I think is going to be the fantasy rookie of the year, and that's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It may be a slow start, but I do look forward to seeing how he's going to be integrated into this offense. Along with that, Justin, we have ourselves a couple new receivers in Houston who are going to look to make an impact. Anyone in the Houston wide receiver core that you're looking forward to watching this week as we see the fantasy situations play out?
It'll be interesting to see the distribution of how the passing game is funneled through Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. I think those are going to be the two guys to own in this receiving core in 2020. It'll be very interesting to see what Will Fuller does, right? I mean, when he's on the field, the guy has been electric. He's been one of those week winning sort of fantasy players. Brandon Cooks has been more of the stable 1,000-yard every season, aside from last season, been more of that stable producer. So I'll be very curious to see who Deshaun Watson favors in this passing game.
Yeah, that'll be that. And I think, Justin, the only things you don't want to be starting this week are these team defenses, because this promises to be a pretty high-scoring game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, without a doubt. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored here on the first night. It'll be a fun game to watch, man. Mahomes, Watson, two of the bright young quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm ready for it, man. I can't wait.
Yeah, you've got Hill, you've got Hardman, you've got Cooks, you've got Fuller, you've got DJ, you've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's a lot of fantasy options going on night one, and let's just hope it's a little more entertaining than last year's opening night where the score was low, the action wasn't all that exciting. But I think, it's a pretty safe bet to think that this is going to be an exciting game.
Yeah, Corey, and don't forget about my favorite kicker in the NFL, Mr. Harrison Butt Kicker.
Yep, always exciting to watch those kickers play. So let's move into Justin. After Thursday night is over, we still have a large slate of games that still need to get played for week one. No buys starting us off here. We have everyone going, and we have some situations that we want to see play out. We've done plenty of speculating. We've done plenty of thinking and discussing and talking, but now we really want to see what happens. So, Justin, looking into week one and looking past Thursday night's game, what fantasy situations are you looking for, and how are you expecting them to play out in week one?
Yeah, so I think one of the main situations that I'm looking at for week one is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals offense and how this offense functions in its second year with its head coach Taylor and with Joe Burrow under the helm here at the quarterback position. I'll be very interested to see what it looks like. Is Mixon still the bell cow he was the second half of the year, right? Is he going to be this guy that's going to be getting, 300 touches, 50 catches this year? It could very possibly happen in 2020. Who's the preferred target for Burrow? Is it, AJ Green? Is it Tyler Boyd? Does Tyler Boyd kind of step up and supplant AJ Green is the number one option here on this offense? What's the tight end landscape look like for the Bengals? What sort of offensive philosophy does Taylor implement here with Joe Burrow? I'll be very curious to see. I think the unknown is really what's most tempting to me, and I think the Bengals could be a pretty exciting offense when you look at it in comparison to 2019, right? I mean, the offense was absolutely putrid. I think Burrow elevates this offense pretty highly. I'll be very curious to see the impact on some of the skill position players. Corey, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, speaking of looking forward to something and speaking of unknown, let's talk about the fact that one of the biggest unknowns, probably and surprisingly, is this Dallas wide receiver group that we're going to be looking at this year. And I got to be honest, this group really confused me when it came to fantasy this year. I think the most talented guy in the receivers room right now is Amari Cooper. But that doesn't mean that he will not give up a lot of looks to guys like Michael Gallup, who had a really strong year last year, and the new guy, CeeDee Lamb. I don't think Gallup's as talented as everyone is making him out to be. They think he's going to supplant Amari Cooper. I don't necessarily see that. I'd like to remind you all that a lot of Gallup's fantasy production last year came in just a few games, but you can kind of say the same about Amari Cooper. I mean, he was as boom or bust as it got last year, and even though he finished in the top 10 wide receivers, he wasn't a lot of fun to own on a week-to-week basis. So does CeeDee Lamb's inclusion in this make this even more of a headache? Or is this a rising tide lifts all ships type of situation where now all of a sudden you're going to see a little more consistency. Every wide receiver is going to get used. And we just don't know, right? We don't know. They have a new head coach coming in. They have a new offensive scheme possibly taking over. But this is going to be a complicated group to work out, Justin. And Lamb's inclusion just maybe makes this more volatile than it was last year, which was already a pretty risky situation.
So, Corey, I'll throw out a little piece of trivia here for you. There have been 5 teams in NFL history that have had a trio of 1,000-yard receivers. Do you know who the last team was to have a trio of 1,000-yard receivers?
So I'm going to take a shot here and say the Denver Broncos with Welker, Demaryius Thomas, and Eric Decker.
No, they actually fell short. The last team to have a trio of 1,000-yard receivers was actually the 2008 Arizona Cardinals. That was the 5th and the last occurrence of a trio of wide receivers being over 1,000 yards. The wide receivers they had on that squad were Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, and Steve Beaston when Kurt Warner was the quarterback for the Cardinals. So that was the last team to have a trio of 1,000-yard receivers back in 2008. So it's been 12 years at this point. But I think it could really happen with the Cowboys, man. I think it could this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be fantasy production to be found. I just don't know if it's going to be as consistent. And the reason why I bring up those Denver Broncos is because anyone who is buying into this Dallas wide receiver situation, that's what they want, right? They want the Denver Broncos situation when Peyton came in, and all 3 of those wide receivers were fantasy viable on a week-to-week situation. I don't know if that's the NFL anymore, Justin. I think there's a real possibility that this is going to be a head-scratching situation, and it's going to be a situation where you're throwing guys out there and you're just crossing your fingers and hoping they're the one that gets targeted a lot that week.
Yeah. If you're going to take of the 3, who's the odd man out that doesn't get 1,000? Is it CD being the rookie?
Justin, I'm going to go with what I said earlier. I don't think Gallup's as talented as everyone's making him out to be. I think he's a good wide receiver. I don't think he's ever going to be a wide receiver 1. I think Lamb and Cooper are the wide receiver 1s, and I think they have that talent and they have that ability. So if I'm guessing here, I'm saying Gallup's season from last year is more of an outlier, and when push comes to shove, I think Gallup's the one on the way out, right? They drafted CD this year. They just signed Amari to a new 4-year deal. I think they know that their time is borrowed with Gallup, and I think they're going to want to sort of evolve and morph into this offense that's going to rely on their 2 big play threats, Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. So if I'm a betting man, I'm thinking that Gallup will be the odd man out here.
Man, as an owner of CeeDee Lamb in a couple dynasty leagues, I would love to see that, man. I agree. I think you're right. I think it's going to be Cooper and CeeDee here for the next few years for the Cowboys. It's a good call.
So there we go, Justin. There is our preview for week 1, our wrap-up of the offseason, and we are getting ready for a slate of games. Our week 1 show for the 2020 season is now in the books. Next week, we continue our weekly season episodes. We'll have a recap of week 1, and we'll get you ready for week 2. Remember to subscribe, hit the bell, download, follow, like, comment, whatever you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Enjoy some football, everybody.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.